So you may have heard of this new product that recently came out on the market. I'm talking about the Apple HomePod. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Apple HomePod is Apple's version of a smart speaker. It's kind of like the Amazon Echo or the Google Home. If you ever used any of those products, then you'll be familiar with the Apple HomePod. Now, there have been a lot of reviews going up recently of the Apple HomePod, and a lot of these reviews are a mixed bag. A lot of people are saying this is a good speaker. A lot of people are saying this is just an okay speaker. And believe me, there are some people out there that are saying avoid this speaker at the very moment. So there are a lot of mixed reviews when it comes to the Apple HomePod. There's a lot of good things about this speaker, and there's a lot of bad things about the speaker. For instance, there are some really good things about the Apple HomePod. For instance, one, this is the best sounding smart speaker on the market. I think it has like 7 speakers on it. It does have a tweeter, a subwoofer. It also has really good bass response overall. It has some of the best sounding sound you can buy out of a smart speaker. But then again, of course, if you look at the price of the Apple HomePod is about double what you would pay with any other smart speaker on the market. And some of those other smart speaker competitors like the Amazon Echo and the Google Home even have options to just get you to throw up a connected home device or a smart assistant. They have options as little as $50. That's right. So if you wanted to buy some of the other competition on the market, you can get their smart speakers for as little as $50, and then they can go up all the way up to close to $200 if you so choose to, depending on what option you want for some of those other smart speakers on the market. Another good thing about the Apple HomePod is the fact it just looks really pleasing to look at. The design of it's really nice. Overall, this is just a really good, well-built design device with really good sound for the Apple HomePod. But then we get to some of the negatives of this smart speaker. Some of the negatives of this smart speaker are the fact that when you try to play music on this, which is what most likely you're going to want to do with the Apple HomePod because it's a speaker, of course, it just doesn't have the same capabilities when it comes to streaming music. For instance, one, you are going to be limited to Apple Music when it comes to the Apple HomePod. So you can't use like Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Play Music. You can't use any of those servers. You have to use strictly Apple Music when it comes to the Apple HomePod. Now again, you can actually go through AirPlay, but who really wants to go through AirPlay? AirPlay is kind of an inconvenient way to stream music to this device, so you're better off using what's built on. But unfortunately, what's built onto the speaker is Apple Music at the very moment. So that's inconvenient when you look at the competition. Again, a lot of their streaming services aren't just limited to what they offer. Like Amazon offers Amazon Music, but it's not limited on the Amazon Echo. The Google Home has Google Play Music, but they can both play Spotify, they can both play other services, so you're not stuck with just one streaming service. And that can be a downside, especially if you don't have Apple Music and you're a Spotify customer or you're a Google Play customer. Unfortunately, you can't use any of those options when it comes to streaming music, so that is a big downside. But one of the biggest downsides, which is much more of a problem for the Apple HomePod, is the fact that it does have Siri built on for the assistant, and we all know Siri does not compare to the competition. If you were to compare it to Alexa or the Google Assistant, it just can't do a lot that those other assistants can do on the market. And that's not me hating on Apple. When I look at Apple, I always have an open mind. I'm not one of those people that like trashing Apple and things like that. I look at Apple with an open mind, and that's just the case. And a lot of people will agree with me that Siri is just not really a good assistant. It just does not compare to the competition. Sure, there's some really good things about Siri, but then there's a lot of bad things about Siri. And overall, if I was to have one assistant in a smart speaker, I would not take Siri. I would rather take Alexa or the Google Assistant over Siri any day, and that's just me telling it how it is. Sorry to burst your bubble, guys. And unfortunately, Siri is not just capable. Now, granted, I have not used Siri on the Apple HomePod. I've only used Siri on like the MacBook, the iPhone, the iPad, the iPod Touch. So I have used Siri in other devices. And apparently this is the same Siri that you're going to get with some of the other Apple products. And I've used those before, and I can't confirm. Like I said, this is just not the greatest experience. And the bad thing about this is, why would you buy an Apple HomePod over the competition, because isn't the whole point of buying a smart speaker to get the assistant on board? That's the whole point of it. You're not really buying it for just strictly a speaker, because if you want to buy just strictly a speaker, I'm sure there's better options on the market that will even sound better than the Apple HomePod. I know there's the Sonos speakers, and the Sonos speakers are amazing, and the fact the Sonos speakers you can actually connect if you have multiple speakers. So if you wanted to make like stereo sound of them, put one at the end of your room and put one at the other end of the room, you can make it a stereo sound. Whereas the Apple HomePod, at the very moment, another downside is the fact that you can't connect multiple Apple HomePods together to make like a surround sound type deal or even a stereo type deal, whereas you can do that on some of the other products like the Google Home and even the Amazon Echo. At the very moment, you can connect multiple speakers together to make some kind of surround sound or stereo sound. So that's another downside with the Apple HomePod. But overall, this thing just is a mixed bag. It's an okay speaker and things like that. And a lot of the things that I'm saying in this video are just things that Apple can, of course, fix in the future. It's not all doom and gloom. For instance, they can just throw on a firmware update to the Apple HomePod, and they can add features to Siri if they want to in the future to make Siri a much more confident or much more capable assistant when it comes to those type of features. And they can also add much more streaming services to this device. So it's not like it's all of a loss. They just kind of like released this thing as like a half-baked product on the market. Of course, this thing was supposed to come out in December of 2017, and then they delayed it until February of 2018, and this thing still feels like a half-baked product. So it kind of sucks it is a half-baked product, but I'm sure in the future this thing is going to be a lot better. But there is one thing about the Apple HomePod that can't really be fixed with a software update, and a lot of the people on the internet are going bonkers about the Apple HomePod. I'm talking about the fact that the Apple HomePod is one device on the market. If you set it on wooden furniture, it actually leaves a big ring, kind of like if you left hot coffee on a wooden table, it can leave a ring around it, or if you leave like water or something, it can actually leave a ring. And there have been pictures on the internet of the Apple HomePod leaving rings on table, and people are furious. Take a look at one of the pictures on the internet, which clearly show the Apple HomePod leaving a big ring around the table. Now, as you can clearly see, there is a big ring on the wooden surface that they left the Apple HomePod on, and if I was that person, I would be really mad too if the Apple HomePod left a big ring on my wooden surface that I placed the Apple HomePod on. Now, I'm not 100% sure how many cases there have been of people leaving the Apple HomePod on a wooden surface and it caused a ring left behind, but it's not good news if there's any cases of that. There should not be any cases of any wooden ring left behind of the Apple HomePod. Here's what Apple had to say about the rings on wooden surfaces left behind on the Apple HomePod. It is not unusual for any speaker with a vibration dampening silicone base to leave mild marks when placed on some wooden surfaces. The marks can be caused by oils diffusing between the silicone base and the table surface, and will often go away after several days when the speaker is removed from the wooden surface. If not, wiping the surface gently with a soft, damp, or dry cloth may remove the marks. If marks persist, clean the surface with the furniture manufacturer's recommended cleaning process. If you're concerned about this, we recommend placing your HomePod on a different surface. Now, as you can see from what Apple said, Apple pretty much explained why that it leaves a ring on some wooden surfaces after you placed it there for quite a long time. But then a lot of people aren't buying that, because how come some of the other smart speakers on the market aren't leaving a ring around the table when it comes to their smart speaker? Overall, it just really looks like Apple really did develop some kind of half-baked product right now. And it does seem like with some of their other products, they're really developing half-baked products. I remember back in the day, they really made some innovative products. Like, they weren't the first on the market to make some of these products, but they did, when they did release these products, they made them better than the competition. For instance, smartphones were already available on the market when Apple made their smartphone. So they weren't the first on the market to make a smartphone, but when they made the smartphone, they made one of the best smartphones on the market when they finally came out with their smartphone. Same thing with their tablets. They weren't the first on the market to make tablets. I remember there's have been some touchscreen 2-in-1 tablets way back in the day from like HP and Dell, and those were actually considered tablets, and they had like a stylus and you can actually write on them, and they had Windows. And as you can see, a full Windows computer on a tablet with a stylus just doesn't really make too much sense, and it wasn't the greatest experience. But when Apple released the first iPad with iOS on it, and it was truly made for touch, it was one of the best tablets on the market. So you can see in their past they are known to coming out late with some of these ideas, but when they finally come out with some of these ideas that people have already been making for years, they come out with a bang and they make some of the better products. They actually redefine some of the products that people have been making, and they make them better than what they have been. They pretty much just redefine them and remanufacture them and just make them much more better devices. But nowadays, you can see with the Apple HomePod, how come smart speakers have been on the market for quite some time now, and you would think they would take some cues from some of the other smart speaker makers like Amazon and Google, and they would actually make their smart speaker better or at the same level. But unfortunately, you can really see that this smart speaker just does not, at the moment anyway, it just does not feel like it's ready to hit the market. It feels like this thing should have been delayed at least another 6 months to even a year for this thing to even come out. Anyway, guys, this is Wayne from My Tech News, signing out.